Now while these things were happening on the earth by the decrees of fate, when the cradle of Bacchus twice born was safe, it chanced that Jove, as the story goes, while warmed with wine, put care aside and bandied good-humored jests with Juno in an idle hour. I maintain, said he, that your pleasure in love is greater than that which we enjoy. She held the opposite view, and so they decided to ask the judgment of wise Tiresias. He knew both sides of love. For once, with the blow of his staff, he had outraged 2 huge serpents mating in the green forest, and, wonderful to relate, from man he was changed into a woman, and in that form spent 7 years. In the 8th year, he saw the same serpents again, and said, since in striking you there is such magic power as to change the nature of the giver of the blow, now I'll strike you once again. So saying, he struck the serpents, and his former state was restored, and he became as he had been born. He, therefore, being asked to arbitrate the playful dispute of the gods, took sides with Jove. Saturnia, they say, grieved more deeply than she should, and than the issue warranted, and condemned the arbitrator to perpetual blindness. And the Almighty Father, for no God may undo what another God has done, in return for his loss of sight, gave Tiresias the power to know the future, lightening the penalty by the honor. He, famed far and near, through all the Boeotian towns, gave answers none could censure to those who sought his aid. The first to make trial of his truth and assured utterances was the nymph Liriope, whom once the river god Cephasus embraced in his winding stream and ravished while imprisoned in his waters. But when her time came, the beauteous nymph brought forth a child, whom a nymph might love even as a child, and named him Narcissus. When asked whether this child would live to reach well-ripened age, the seer replied, if he never knows himself. Long did the saying of the prophet seem but empty words, but what befell proved its truth. The event, the manner of his death, the strangeness of his infatuation. For when Narcissus was 16, he might seem either boy or man, and lots of youths and maidens sought his heart. But in that slender form was pride so cold that no youth, no maiden could approach his love. Once, while he was driving the frightened deer into his nets, a certain nymph of strange speech took him in to her eyes and spent a moment pontificating on the nature of their potential entwinement. But she could neither hold her peace when others spoke, nor yet begin to speak until others had addressed her. Resounding echo. Now, I had a moment of technical difficulty on that delivery there, as the wind, in a particularly interesting moment, decided to take my camera down as I'm grabbing a wide shot here of a herd that was meant to be my audience today. Though it seems they decided to gather slightly deeper into the valley, away from the water, but perhaps they had already had their drink, and perhaps it was after an evening meal that they decided to lay down and take an evening nap. And it turns out they missed my performance to them. I promised I'd learn these two sections of this bit by Ovid and give them the delivery of it in full. Now, I did that. It turns out my only audience member was a bird, and whatever bugs might have crawled up this direction. But I'm taught a nice lesson today in that even when there is no audience, sometimes you gotta give your performance anyways. See if one begins to conjure. Now, it is a very hot day today, and it is a good deal windy, so this is a nice test of my equipment. And a good time to go over those words I just delivered and what I've been thinking about them lately in certain ways. I was hoping to have some heifer eyes on me today, but I think maybe the only heifer eyed that is gazing upon the visage that is me delivering some lines of Ovid would be those in the sky, those in the clouds, and those on mountaintops or perhaps distant farms staring out at me with binoculars, having the faintest idea what I might be up to out here. Now, I believe this is public land, though I might be mistaken, though I mean no harm to any of the fence posts or water troughs that might be near. However, if someone did approach me, I certainly would see them from a long ways away and be able to allow them the pleasure of meeting my acquaintance or scoot off in a direction down the other hill with a tail tucked between my legs. Now, it depends on where I am in my talk. If that were to happen, I might consider either route, depending on what I can make of them from a distance. But I've been wanting to give a talk about heifer eyes for a little while now. And what I was hoping for was some heifer eyes staring back at me while I talked, but it's all right. You who might be catching this out on the waves somewhere, maybe you got a heifer eye about yourself. And that doesn't mean fat girl. Though perhaps maybe it does, and we will not know until we reach the end of this. Now, heifer eyed, I've mentioned before refers to the goddess, the one who accompanied and drove most heroic action of the protagonist of the tale of Ulysses. Now, I'm not talking about the James Joyce novel, though that is meant to be a mirror image told in Ireland, I believe. I don't know. I read the beginning of it. I found it to be a little bit, well, whatever I say will upset some literary type, so I'll just leave it at gay. But anyhow, that is not meant to disparage a certain group, nor is it like to make people too happy. The wrong type of people might get a little too happy with that sentence, including myself at a younger age. I don't want to go into this topic now. Except for, I don't mind talking about it. It's just rather we wouldn't really get anywhere except for in the shit. So I don't really want to play in that. But I do have a good deal to say about the Bacchanalia. But I digress. To the Heifer Eyed goddess, the one who sees as if giving more milk than human mothers in America. Indeed, they are the mothers of us all. We get their meat, we get their milk, and we are nurtured by them. And I'm upset that my mother didn't come to my performance today, but she looks comfortable laying down there in the valley. Some of them standing up. Couple. Some of them look like they've been shot dead. But that goddess is also the matron name, I suppose you should say, the matron name of the most prominent city in the nation of the Hellenes, Hellas, or Greece, you might call it. Hellas. Interesting title. I suppose I owe something of my name to that as well. But anyhow, that goddess is the virgin warrior goddess that I've spoken about before. And just trying to speak out to the ways that she might be in concert with the current state of the modern world. I guess you might say would be my aim or my plea to the clouds who might be taking in my performance. And we'll begin with what I've been talking about and how I see it might relate to what's going on in the world in some weird way. What is the story? Well, first we have the nature of the world. And the nature of the world is the cradle of Bacchus is safe. The cradle of Bacchus twice born is safe. Now it helps if you're an American to think about Bacchus as quite literally the figure which represents liberty, which you have heard of plenty. The primary phrase in a libertarian and the Statue of Liberty, which is in fact a man, and that man is the Roman figure of liber. Same root word applies to the word library. Freedom of knowledge. There's a Liberty University, known as the Flames. The flame of liberty is the torch he's holding in his hand. Now, some people are aware of this. So most people are not. And if you're catching these waves and you're shocked by some of these things, well, you're in the right place, maybe. Or maybe you already know this. And you might think this guy is spitting some weird symbolic esoteric BS. He's probably a Freemason or a Catholic Church plant or a member of the Judean tribe who is currently making the claim that they are chosen, or some American bureaucracy that is levels above you. But I admit to you, wholeheartedly and with all truth I can muster, that the only house I have ever belonged to is that of the sky. And though I am guilty of having an American education, at both the high school level as well as the graduate level, as well as being a once card-carrying member of a prestigious club known as the United States Military, I have only ever set foot in churches a handful of times, and only then as a tourist. I have mingled with those who have been affiliated with the Church of Satan, Scientology, Mormonism. I even lived with a Jew for a year. But I've never been in a Masonic house without being aware of that's what it was, or knowing what that might be. I believe one time I was in a Knights of Columbus, which is some sort of adjacent society that's, I believe they care for the checkerboard form and all sorts of regalia. But I don't really know what they have to do with anything. Most of this stuff is gleaned from personal experience, is what I'm trying to say. If some authority came down on me, it would be as if an enemy. And who would I call to aid in my defense? None, because I am a free man and unaffiliated. I act in service of Liber. Now, people use this term before when they describe Nietzsche as his patron deity being Liber, because he made a statement about him. I mean, I'm making statements about Heifer Eyed goddesses, and I'm making statements about Juno and the moon. Now, I serve Liber because I serve the 13. Now, that might be a strange concept. Maybe I spend time talking about the 12, and maybe I'll return to that at some point. But the 13 is Liber. He is the one who brought about the age which followed the Roman deities as primary in existence. And when about he showed up and when he was birthed from a man, by the way, that's what twice born means. Well, he was birthed, and then Tahad, he was sewn up in the thigh of the Almighty, and then born again. And he has some peculiar characteristics in those who fall under his sway. Well, let's just say he's got a design for him. And what seems interesting enough, since I am on this topic, and I suppose I will go towards it further, is that when I refer to the Bacchanalia, I'm talking about the horde of Liber. And what did those do? Say to the city of Thebes, they drove the king mad and had it so his blood was spilled. And the order of governance changed into something which was more aligned with the servitude of the god Liber. And how did he do that? He had the women cast down their duties and join what might be described as an orgy, although people just hear that term and think of sexual themes, but sexual is important in this discussion, of course it is. Though an orgy used to mean things other than that, things that happen tangentially. The use of psychotic inducing herbs and the like, of intoxicants, of depressants, of ecstasy and Molly and heroin and black tar, stuff I can't even imagine. Acid. Who knows? To just go off kilter as much as could be enjoyed. And this is a sign of excess in a society as well, as these things happen simultaneously for a reason. And part of that reason was, well, this was the son of the primary entity, the primary God, the father figure of a pantheon. And when that central deity gives birth to something, what's born is what takes over priority. This is what happens when a generation retires and the younger generation ends up in the workforce doing what their forebears had done. However, without fail, they will reach a new landscape and they will meet new traps and changing ways due to technology and changing social stigma. That out of this process, it produces a number of heroines. And a number of tragic male heroes. And a number, if I do say so myself, of comedians. All of these things must exist, the same way that all of the 13 must exist. And diminishing it down into a single central figure diminishes the ability to tell stories. Why? Because you get one story. You get one book. And that book quickly starts to run out of its ability to retell itself. Even when a number of writers, a number of poets, comedians, dramatists, what have you, even when they come together and compile, what they create will only last a time. Well, times change. And that's not something to be fretful about. And it's not necessarily something to wholeheartedly embrace. Otherwise, you're just, a piece of broken off sage being picked for its scent and then cast off to blow around in the wind as it withers. So this Bacchanalia, it's essentially, in its current form, as a representation of the excess that was American life, and is in some small pockets, and is diminishing its return on enjoyment. It's changing. And these hordes of, well, they're gay pride parades. You might have heard, maybe that's a name for them. And these deviate in form in some ways and focus on other aspects of casting aside a sort of social order, which is desperately attempting to cling hold to itself always. And the ones that cast this aside, well, they end up walking around casting aside everything that they would ever consider to be structurally integral to their existence. This is breaking down columns, spray painting the side of a building with a poorly made tag, a scratch on the wall, graffiti, or just general mayhem and destruction. They're all born of the same thing. A flame of liberty. Flames are vibrant characters. You're going to hold one in a torch, that's about the best you're going to control that thing. Now we got it controlled in combustion engines and nuclear power and jet engines, and I mean that's about the most we've done with it, to be honest, but with fire, that is. And even language itself in some places is said to be the words of fire. Now I am not speaking to you from the words of fire, though it might seem as if I am capable of doing so, but that is only because of the nature of the social strata from which I have gleaned my existence, gleaned from my experiences. And what I see is that I am a man who speaks water. And I think one of the first to speak water and maybe be properly identified for it was Nietzsche. Now, more broadly, you might say that the languages which are considered in the family Indo-European might very well be the language of water. And it rises with the waves. Now, you might have heard that phrase before, Indo-European languages. Now, you might have also heard a phrase called anti-Semitism, or being labeled an anti-Semite, and that has ties to the Judean tribes and the Zionists and what have you, World War II, the mythologies of the Great Wars, and how certain peoples were affected and certain peoples were also affected but don't quite have as strong to a claim of the nature of victim storytelling roles. Now, what does that mean? Anti-Semitism. It seems everybody focus on race, and they talk about the people there, and they talk about can't figure out if they're a race or religion or which one gives them primacy, or is it both, and they can jump from one camp to the other based on their present circumstance and how to win an argument or stay alive or whatever the case may be. But no one I heard yet seems to talk about how the word itself is related to the language that they speak, which is a Semitic language. And they speak it well, and they speak it hidden in a place that is surrounded by water talkers. So imagine, if you would, a ball of flame, and it's under the water. Now, is that ball of flame heating those around it? Sure. Is that ball of flame changing the currents? You might even say the currency of that water around, maybe to suit its needs, like a hot air balloon. How do you steer one of those things? Well, you heat over here when you want, and you go heat over there when you want. And you watch the water move the way that you commanded it. Of course, they're chosen. Well, I sound like a Zionist now. Of course, of course, they think that they are desperate and victims to survive, even though they manipulate to move and get their way. Is this a horrible thing to say? This is a horrible situation we found ourselves in. Well, no, I'm not saying they're chosen. I'm saying they just speak fire. But what happens when these fire talkers, they learn to speak like water? They learn to move water this way and that. They warm it and they cool it. What happens when the water learns the way that the fire speaks? What happens then? What happens when a ball of water holds itself by its protective barrier in the flame, and it cools it down when it wants to move this way and that? It affects not the currency. It affects the ignition. It affects the spark. Now, those water people that speak fire, who's to say those aren't chosen? There's current paradigm a long distance from here that's affecting people that never thought that they would care to think about it. And there's certain people who seem to be between a rock and a hard place, quite literally, as they go up against some fire speakers. Now, these ones are also fire speakers, and isn't that an interesting concept? Because these fire speakers read a book and hold it as their primary religious text, their single religious text. And the original is written in a Semitic language, though the people that speak it use their native tongue, which is Indo-European. Now, these water speakers are in a conundrum, are they not? It's easy for me to speak the words of water when I look up at the clouds and I think back to the forebears who wrote poems about and cast pure white marble visages of those who were in their grand plays that helped them learn about the world and prepare for the coming of whoever. In this case, Bacchus. In this case, Liber. Which is preemptively told in the story of Thebes as a warning. Now, what did I read about? What was my performance about? That's just talking about the cradle of Bacchus. The cradle of Bacchus, twice born, was safe. It chanced that Jove put care aside. As the story goes. While warmed by wine, how whimsical. And he said to his woman, he said, you know all those men, all those women down there getting intimate with each other? Who derives more pleasure from that experience? And he said, she does. And she said, he does. Now they're referring to themselves as well, but the way that those two get intimate, well, I won't share all the dirty secrets, but I will let you know that it is enjoyable for both, even though craziness can be brought from that experience. The conflict between those two, the push-pull, if you will. It's an interesting dynamic, and one that is not very well described, in my opinion, by those who claim a singular force. But I digress. This is not an attack. There's multiple perspectives to see the world, and this is just one. This is just one, or this is just many. Through one, you be the judge, if you'd like. So they have this dispute, and they weren't sure who to ask. So who do they turn to? They turned to a future prophet. Wasn't a prophet yet. Well, he was in the process of becoming one. A prophet, a seer. Someone who speaks the truth that none could censure. Now, what does censure mean? That means no one could completely argue against the point. Well, what you say, Tiresias, that might be truth in whole. And it might be frightening. But damn well if you ain't right. Now, why we introduce a prophet here? We got the primary male deity. We got the primary female deity. And now we have a prophet. Meant to arbitrate the dispute. He gets to be the judge. Because he has the experience. Now, what is experience? Well, first, he struck two huge serpents mating in the green forest. Now, what is that a reference to? That is a reference to modern medicine. This poem, by the way, was written 2,000 years ago. And you might say this is crazy, but we are talking about prophecy here. Two huge serpents mating in the green forest. Now, what do serpents do? They entwine, and he hit them with a stick. Now, what does that remind you of? Maybe the symbol that represents the medical conglomerate that is central medicine, big med. I don't know what you want to call it. It's a staff, and it's represented with all sorts of imagery, but that would be one of the primary ones. So through the modern medicine miracles, or in a poetic, prophetic way, struck 2 huge serpents, turned him into a woman for 7 years. And he's meant to arbitrate this dispute. What does he arbitrate? He arbitrates the idea that he's a woman now, so he can go ahead and have sexual relations with men as a woman. And he says, while in that form 7 years, the pleasure I derived as a woman was greater than when I am a man. He strikes the serpents again, returns his form, is a man again, and he's asked, and he gives that as a response. You, what do you think? You're a man? Maybe you're a woman. Or maybe you angered 2 huge serpents mating in the green forest, and you tried to change yourself around to see the other perspective or whatever. Now, how's it worded in this piece of work, at least this translation? Well, it requires the use of pronouns, which is interesting. Is this already, I'm starting to feel that this discussion and these talking points are dated because people are tired of them. But he turned into a woman, and the text still refers to him as a he. So he's, whatever you want to say, you can't change your chromosomes, you can't change your strands of DNA, by the way, which is also the same symbology as the intertwining serpents. That's how we derived that as a model. And does it actually geographically look like that? So I don't know. It's up to you. You want to believe that or not? I don't care. Someone probably draw a picture for you, make you believe it. Doesn't matter. Well, things at that size matter a whole bunch, but the degree to which they matter is a degree far beyond sometimes. It's a landscape of the influential to manipulate the influenced. It's a landscape for fire speakers of the medical industry to influence the water speakers who are unaware of the fire's existence. Just another example of the same idea I've been trying to plant in. It's about languages, it's about knowledge and that, so on and so forth. Now, who derives more pleasure? I would say, in my personal experience, now I'm speaking from the mouth of a virgin goddess here as much as I can please her, so this topic becomes difficult for me. But in my interrelations with women, I would say generally, it depends. Sometimes it depends on whether or not I can feel her love back at me or not. I don't want this to go on too long, and I've been at it for a bit, so I'll go a bit longer. Try and finish up some of this stuff. She, being the goddess, Juno. After this, by the way, the text refers to her as Saturnia, which is a reference to her father, Saturn. It says she's Saturnia now. That means she's about to get pissed. That's basically what that means. It means her father's anger and aggression is coming out in her. Saturn's also a man of secrets, and so on and so forth. And therefore, you have the arbitrator again, who's asked a question to prove that he has this newly granted ability to tell the future and be a prophet, a seer, and a sage. And the first person to ask him is a nymph. Now, what's a nymph today? Nymphomaniac, again, diminishing things down to the most raw drives, is an affront to the Heifer Eyed, to the virgin warrior. So I feel it my duty again to disarm this idea. A nymph is a beautiful lady. So beautiful that she gets attacked for her beauty. Therefore, we have the example of the river god, Cephasus. And I love how this phrase is given. Embraced her in his winding stream. Sounds lovely. And ravished while imprisoned in his waters. You get two wholehearted sides to that story. Bam, right like that, right in your face. Who does not want to be embraced in a winding stream? Lovely. Well, women do. And while you have them there and they're feeling that, then they want to be ravished. Now, ravished is a harsh term. He didn't say raped, he said ravished. If you embrace a woman in your winding stream, she will happily be ravished. Now, there is a line that exists somewhere in space where it's still a possibility to be crossed. But when people refer to rape in the modern day, they're not talking about embracing someone in their winding stream and then ravishing them. They're talking about ravishing them because fuck the winding stream and fuck you, I take what I want. Now there's laws against that. Which goes to the fact of morality itself. Can it be the answer of 1 or 0, on or off, yes or no, right and wrong? Well, to the Heifer Eyed, it's a bit more complicated because there's a lot of play. And sometimes the truth of a thing depends on its point in time. Someone might call me a moral relativist for this. I say you don't define time and measure it and create your existence around it and then deny it conveniently when you're trying to make a moral argument. But all too many people do that exact thing these days. And most of them come from that 1 or 0 camp. Now, this 1 or 0 camp, they believe in everything or they believe in nothing. And they're driving towards the same end. Because ultimately, those will want everything to be nothing. They'll want it to be a singularity, a summary, something they can store away, forget about. Because it's too painful. The stories are too painful, the ups are too painful, the downs are too painful. The ups are too painful because it's anticipation of the downs. And the downs are too painful because you don't know how long you're going to be there until you get up again. The push and the pull. Well, that's missing more and more in today's society. And why is that missing? Why are there so many Heifer Eyed seers and so few fornicators and birthers? Because the singularity is attempting to take over that role. Human beings born in tubes and manipulated, extracting itself entirely from nature. Now that is a frightening idea. If you care about the future existence of this plane. When I think about the word plane, I think about the greatest general to first step foot on these plains. I think about how he was a bit having to do with the story which went to follow. And that was the story about a haughty young boy 16, seem either a boy or a man. Many youths and many maidens sought his love. But he was so proud in that slender form that the other women and the other youths couldn't touch his heart. Now, certainly I am one of these. There are many of these, the e-girls, the YouTubers, the celebrities of any fashion, and those who wish for it. I tell you, I fear it. I fear to be caught in the gazing pool. I do not want that. And I do not want the tools which are being provided to maintain some false visage of myself, some unaging, unwisening, forever youth, when I know when I take the false mask strapped to my face that shows me this, that I will be horrified, and so therefore I will leave it on. Remember that COVID-19 thing? That taught you about your willingness to discard a mask. It's easy when we can put it around your face. Plenty of people enjoyed the experience right off the bat. And those will be the first that want to hide themselves. I'll say you are those that are not the narcissists. But they are in fact the biggest narcissists. Because they are not in love with what they see. When they look in a mirror, they're ashamed of it. And they want to hide it from the world. This is a pitiful type. They deserve pity. And they deserve the ability to hide themselves. But they should not be granted the ability to deceive others. And this gets back to that idea of Tiresias spending time in both. It's a ridiculous idea to live yourself as a trick. Prostitute. And derive pleasure from that experience. Though many do. Now, the great general was a great man. The greatest, in fact, to first set foot on these plains. And he certainly was concerned about how his appearance was maintained. And you know why he was concerned about that? It was for the pleasure of his wife. And therefore he kept his hair long and even kept a nice scent in it with an oil infused with cinnamon. And my forebear, I am happy to announce that I have just began putting into a line of production some of this. For our kin, for our like-minded. Now, amazingly, before all this talk about magic treatments for thinning hair follicles, you gotta understand that cinnamon actually is pretty good for a certain type of hair, especially in dry conditions, such as Great Plains and mountain valleys. And you might even ask a doctor about what sort of functions that kind of thing might perform. And they might say something like antifungal and protective and so on and so forth. Stimulate the red blood cell production in the scalp and potential to regrow. I don't know. You might hear some claims such as that. All I know is it brings me closer to my forebear. And it makes me think maybe a young lass who will defend my honor for years after my passing and share with me letters would most certainly be pleased. At the scent and at its maintenance. Show me the man who can earn a demerit in the United States military for not cutting his hair today. And don't show me some Navy SEAL with a beard. Says, I go undercover. Fuck off. You didn't do that at Buds or whatever. You did whatever they told you. And once you got around a group of guys that already had the beard, then you said, maybe I can grow one. And you struggled with it until you were accepted to have it. Part of the reason I'm no longer in flight these days, a grounded man, can you imagine? Part of that reason is because I refuse to cut my hair. And I attempted to grow into a beard. I say attempted because I was young and struggled at that. And it was not very becoming. And it was not in an environment which was nurturing to it. Therefore, I was cast out of that environment. And I wonder if you've ever attempted to grow something in spite of a current environment. Maybe you grow an olive tree. Maybe even put something underneath it. Some might not like that in the current environment. Maybe you give it some water and not fire. Because look around you. You don't live in the desert. You know what's in the desert? Not a lot of water. Not a lot of water. Speakers. I think we covered a good amount today. I'll play a song on the way out. For now. I'll leave you with, rather. My last line. And I'll come back and we'll have some more talk. Et vera incessu patuit dea.